Hi, my name is Jeff Murrah. I want to welcome you to True Texas History, where today we are going to talk about how Texas changed the world in 1846. I know some of you are probably scratching your head thinking, gee, what happened back in 1846? Well, Texas had just recently joined the Union because they joined the Union at the end of 1845. We became a state. And the troops that had been stationed in Texas since September of 1845 were on this day, January 13th, 1846, giving orders to go ahead and move down into the disputed areas near the Rio Grande. And people knew that war with Mexico was soon approaching. And one of those that knew was Captain Jack Hayes. And Hayes was putting together some Rangers to go ahead and serve with the U.S. Army. Now, Hayes was very familiar with the firepower and the impact of the revolver. And he was so impressed with it, he wanted the group of Rangers that were going to serve alongside the U.S. Army to each be equipped with two of them. And so his familiarity with them had begun with a story going back to the Texas Navy, because the revolvers were originally one of the sidearms of the Texas Navy. It was only when President Houston decided to disassemble the Texas Navy that those guns were turned over to the Rangers, and the Rangers found them very useful in terms of dealing with Indians and unrest. And in fact, I believe it was Samuel Walker went ahead and sent a letter to Colt talking about how impressed his boss, Jack Hayes, was with the performance of the revolver. And that first revolver was called the Patterson revolver. Now, Colt was actually out of business at the time that he received the letter, and he wanted to get some military contracts to go ahead and do something. Make a long story short, eventually Walker and Samuel Colt got together and they laid the groundwork for what became known as the Walker Colt. They made some modifications to the revolver, and actually during some of the negotiations, a third member of the negotiations was none other than Eli Whitney, the father of the cotton gin. And together they came up with the new design for the Walker Colt. And the Walker Colt was very deadly. It was a black powder revolver. And on the downside, when you were shooting it, there was a risk that it was going to explode in your hand. Yet on the positive side, the projectile, when it left the barrel, left with essentially some of the velocity and power of like a .357 Magnum. And some of the observers on the field during the Mexican-American War, which is where the revolver first saw combat, commented that its impact when it hit its target was greater than that of the Mississippi rifles that were presently in use at the time. So it had a lot of oomph, and for the time, the amount of black powder that was used in the cartridge was double that of any other pistol at the time. So it was a revolutionary item, and each Texas Ranger had two of them. Now, the performance of the revolver was such that the Army was impressed, and they started using more of the revolvers. And the revolver actually revolutionized many aspects of warfare, because rather than fire, put your gun back, reload it, fire again, the revolver allowed you to fire off 5 or 6 shots in a short period of time, which gave you the edge over the enemy. It's almost like, while they fire 1, maybe 2 shots, you could get double, triple the amount of shots off, and that makes a huge difference on the battlefield. And it did make a big difference in the Mexican-American War. When you get into the brass tacks of the war, many of the engagements, the Mexican forces outnumbered ours, and you've got to wonder, what is it that turned the table? Well, I think one of the things that did make a difference was the revolver and use of the revolver. Captain Jack Hayes saw the potential of it. Samuel Walker, who was a Ranger, in his negotiations with Colt, they talked about what kind of improvements were needed to it to make it even better. And that they did, and it changed the world. Now the meeting between Walker and Colt happened in January, as did some of the invasion of the disputed area between Texas and Mexico. So those are some of the things that happened in January of 1846, and how Texas started changing the world through the use of the revolver. There's a lot of innovations that we made that we don't pay much attention to, but they changed the world as they knew it at that time. Hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to give it a thumbs up, leave your comments. I'll be glad to get to them. So until next time, this is Jeff Murrah wishing you vaya con Dios, my friends. Goodbye.